I'm Brendan Keefe. I'm the Chief Investigative Reporter with the Techna Station in Atlanta, 11 Alive, and this is how to make a better news story working solo. The advantages as an investigative reporter are many. I work alone because it gives me the freedom to budget my own time, to prioritize creativity. And as an investigative reporter, I can follow my gut, which is one of the most powerful tools we have. Even for general assignment reporting, it allows you to just budget your own time so you can prioritize creativity. You can say, you know what, I'm going to spend 2 hours on this element because it's going to help the viewer and the audience understand this complex issue better than anything else in which I could invest my time. One of the biggest challenges in working alone is managing your time. How do you budget that time? And also, you don't have a partner or a supervisor looking over your shoulder, sort of egging you on to do certain things. Some people need that guidance, they need that collaboration, and that's one thing you miss when you're working alone. But what you get is that freedom, and it's intoxicating because you can say, you know what, I'm going to do this on-camera stand-up where I'm going to demonstrate some complex subject, and it's going to take me 2 hours to shoot and edit that. That's very hard to do in a collaborative environment because you have to convince the person with whom you're working that that's a worthy investment of 2 hours. But we think nothing of driving an hour each way to get one soundbite that's 8 seconds long. And that's not even including shooting it. When you're working with a partner or working with a team, you're doing them in series and they're doing their series, and that's done in parallel. When you're working alone, everything's in series, so that you can't be writing your digital story and editing at the same time. How do you figure out how to do those two things at the same time? Well, you can't. So what I do is I try to figure out things where I can be shooting two things at one time, which sounds counterintuitive. Maybe I can put a GoPro shooting a time lapse of the sky in front of the house while I'm interviewing the family inside. So that's a great way to get a nice B-roll element to cover my narration, talking about how they've lived in this home for 30 years while I'm inside interviewing them. It costs me no extra time. I can do those two things in parallel. I'm actually shooting the time lapse, which takes time, while I'm also doing the interview, which takes time. Things like that are really helpful. Loading large files or rendering large files of video in the passenger seat while driving, not looking at the screen, just starting the process of uploading the video or rendering a long sort of effects element while driving to another location. That's a great way to work in parallel. And then finally, the great way to working in parallel is taking advantage of that time when you're in the car, because you're not being driven, you are driving. And if you're driving, obviously focus on the road. I'm using a hands-free device, but that's when I'm making my calls. That's when I'm doing meetings and calls, and also pre-interviewing my subjects so that I find out what makes them tick so I can ask better questions when I get there. My concept is to have one person using multiple cameras instead of two people using one big news camera. This is the biggest news camera I have. It's a Sony Z90. It is a 4K Handycam. This has a dual channel wireless receiver on it. So I can actually use two microphones at the same time directly wired into the camera. Rather than using cables coming out and having two receivers or figuring out some other way to hook up two microphones. Most two-person crews don't even use two microphones in an interview. I like to use my questions. I like to use multiple cameras, and you can see it in my stories. I'm able to cut to my questions, and I'm able to cut to a reaction from the person even while I'm asking the question. And then I usually even have a third, fourth, or fifth camera that's even tighter on the subject, so that when they do get emotional, rather than a slow zoom, I can cut into the tighter shot that shows the years on their face or the decades on their face and their feelings and their eyes and their emotion. Then I will also use a DSLR, and my cheapest DSLR is under $500, an A6000 Sony, but with these prime lenses. So this is the equivalent of f1.4. That's a shallow depth of field, so that I can really get in, sort of focus on the subject and let the background melt away. This is actually my primary camera, the Sony A7R II. And then the other thing I'll do is even handy cam wise, even working on a sort of run and gun situation, not like a sit down multi-camera interview. I can do an interview right now with you and still get my questions because I have this camera on you and I have this camera on me. And this is a completely adjustable mount where I can put the camera on me. And I'm also using, in this case, it looks like a GoPro, but in reality, it's a DJI Osmo Action, which is about $199. And we're giving these to all of our staff now, at least our solo staff, because it has this capability of using a front screen. And it's so much more intimate, and it also allows for longer sound bites. One of the criticisms of television news in general is, and particularly local television news, is that our sound bites are so short, you never get to know the characters. Because you have multiple cameras and you can cut in to show emotion, cut back to ask the question, you can have sound bites that are 45 seconds long in even a relatively short piece, and you really get to explore the subject more deeply. I also like to use drones. I'm the station drone pilot. This is my station assigned drone. It's the Mavic Air 2. And this goes in my equipment bag. What's great about this drone is it completely folds up. And it has a 4K camera. It has tracking capabilities. And this allows you, with this camera, to get great shots of the scene, establishing shots. It's really more of a jib or camera crane without a ceiling than a helicopter without a floor. So rather than going up to, say, 400 feet, which is the limit of the FAA, or 200 feet, which is the limit within our company for this size drone, I actually like to bring it down around 10, 15, 20 feet, where it gets much more intimate and you get the parallax of subject and foreground. All of this is about visual storytelling. All of it is about that we're a visual medium. In our company, we use TVU and other field transmission systems. We've really gotten away from the microwave trucks and the satellite trucks. Personally, what I'm using is my phone. I'm using the wireless hotspot on my phone to transmit the stories. I think every field crew in television news knows this. There's certain Wi-Fi hotspots. There's certain locations, certain chains where you can get a cup of coffee and good Wi-Fi. And that's the main way I do it, though, is I can upload a piece, usually in real time, digitally, directly into our VPN, our server, where it can be then put right into the show. I ended up falling in love with Final Cut 10 because of what it can do for the solo journalist. It can sync up to 16 camera angles of different frame sizes, frame rates, all these different cameras. Final Cut 10 can sync, including my phone. A lot of times I will use my phone for one of those camera angles. If I have a wide on one camera and a medium on another camera, I'll use this one for the tight, or vice versa. All those different frame sizes, all those different frame rates, Final Cut 10 is agnostic about it and will actually sync those 16 camera angles. And the way it does it is with audio waveforms. The waveforms of the audio, it syncs up mathematically, the peaks and valleys, and syncs those cameras so that I can cut back and forth very easily. The workflow becomes very simple because all I have to do is lasso the clips, say make multicam clip, and now I have 2, 3, 4, 5 angles for that same interview automatically synced. The other thing I can do is I don't use timecode to log my news stories. I use the favorites tool within Final Cut 10. I will log the multicam clip of the interview, and when listening to it, I will simply hit I for in and O for out, and then F for favorite, and that saves that clip as a favorite, which is just the metadata. When I sort by favorites, I get nothing but my clips lined up, and they're just my selected sound bites. But they're my selected sound bites as essentially nested multicam clips. It sounds a little complicated, but it's an incredibly easy workflow that, because here's the important thing, logging footage is editing. Logging sound bites is editing. Why, when working alone, would you edit twice? When you're logging, you're editing. So that's when I put my in points and out points. And then I transcribe those. But when I go to edit, all I have to do is say favorite 3 and drop it down to the timeline. It's already edited. I just have to then select those camera angles. Another one of my concepts is I have ideas that are looking for stories rather than stories looking for ideas. That you have to be banking those locations that you see. You have to be banking ideas. You know, I saw once the Boy Scouts had painted a map on a playground. And I said, you know, someday I'm going to need to stand on a giant US map. Then I did a story about different laws for sex offenders living near schools. What a great place to explain that, but on the map at the school playground, and went there on a weekend and shot that. So those are ideas you're banking, solutions you're banking in search of a problem, rather than problems looking for a solution on deadline. Music is like a dirty word in broadcast journalism. There's no sort of journalistic prohibition on using music. Where it gets dangerous in using music is that you are toying with emotions, right? You're selecting a piece of music in order to evoke an emotion, and sometimes it's done artificially. When it's done poorly, you have this sort of touching piano music that's telling you, oh, I'm supposed to feel bad for this family, or whatever it is. You have to realize it's a very powerful tool, and you have a journalistic responsibility to make sure that you're not manipulating the emotions, but sometimes it needs a soundtrack. We have to get you emotionally invested at the top to then care about it. I consider graphics, effects, great photography, music to be the spoons full of sugar that help the medicine of the information go down. If I'm going to ask you to listen to the information and the rest of it, I have to give you a little something to sweeten it up a little bit. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that unless you abuse it. Part of being your own photographer and being your own editor is that you have to have a technical mind, and you also have to have a right brain and a left brain mind operating at the same time. So you have to be technical and understand how to operate the cameras and do the editing, but then at the same time, you have to be able to creatively write and all of those things. I think those two things go together. I haven't met a news photographer in TV who wasn't a creative genius at heart, who was just dying to be given the time and the resources. Working alone, I consider myself more like an editor and photographer who gets to report rather than a reporter who gets to shoot and edit or has to. So it's flipping a mindset around into, instead of I have to do these things, I get to do these things. I get to have the creative control. Once you get that mindset, then you start looking for tools just like you're building a house. You're not afraid of the hammer and the saw. You're like, that hammer and the saw can make me build this house and build it more creatively. When you ask a juggler, how do you catch all those balls in the air? Most jugglers would say, it's not about catching, it's about letting go. In order to catch this ball, you have to, the next ball, you have to let this one go. And I think it's the same thing in TV news. You have to let go of all those things that are preventing you from exploring creativity. It's about sort of being on the cutting edge, trying new things, but realize you're going to fail. The great thing about working alone is if you try something and fail, no one's ever going to see it because you're the one editing the story. So if you're on camera doing a stand-up that's really edgy and creative, and by the time you go to put it together, you're like, this is awful, no one has to know. You just put together the story you were going to put together otherwise. But if it succeeds, the payoff is extraordinary. And yes, maybe it's cost you some time, but you've learned a lesson. If you don't treat this job as a craft, and if you don't treat every day as an opportunity to learn, you're wasting your time doing this, because there's much better jobs out there where you can make more money, I don't think you'll be as happy, because this is so rewarding when you can change laws or make a difference in people's lives or spread the word and inform people. Every single day I learn something new. I usually learn it by making a mistake. It's not learning, hey, this is how it works. It's learning, don't press that button again. Sometimes the mistake you make today is the effect you need tomorrow in editing, because you're like, remember that time I hit the wrong button and it did this? That might be exactly what you need for the next story. And so just keep banking those ideas, banking those solutions to problems you don't even know exist yet.